A homeless girl entered the wrong door. She found a single millionaire. The rain came down like it meant to erase the whole city. Sky's sneakers slapped the puddled pavement as thunder cracked above her. Her hoodie was soaked through, the seams leaking cold straight into her skin. Wind howled between abandoned buildings like a chorus of ghosts, and every step felt heavier than the last. She hadn't eaten since yesterday afternoon. Her stomach was a knot of emptiness, but what scared her more was the cold. It had settled into her bones, whispering promises of sleep she knew she couldn't afford. That's when she saw it. A rusted warehouse, old but solid, its corrugated metal walls streaked with grime and time. A flickering industrial light buzzed weakly above a wide garage door, half open like someone had forgotten to close it. No cars, no voices. Just the scent of oil, iron, and damp air. She hesitated, then stepped inside. The echo of her footsteps was swallowed by the cavernous dark. Machinery long unused loomed like sleeping beasts beneath dusty tarps. Workbenches lined the walls, scattered with tools frozen mid-project. At the far end, an old wood stove stood cold and silent. Still, it was shelter. Still, it was dry. Heating. Sky leaned against the wall and let her eyes close, just for a second. Just to breathe, then a voice split the silence. Sharp, low, edged like a blade. "You lost, kid?" Her eyes snapped open. From the shadows behind an old lathe, a figure emerged. Tall, broad, draped in a worn mechanic's coat, boots echoing against the concrete floor. His hair was streaked with gray, tied back loosely, his face obscured by stubble and shadow. But his eyes, steel blue and tired, held no kindness. "This place isn't a shelter," he said. "Get out." Sky raised her hand slightly. "I thought it was empty. I just needed to get out of the rain." "Not my problem." He walked closer, footsteps slow but deliberate. Sky backed toward the door. The wind outside howled like a warning. "Look," she said, voice shaking. "I won't stay long. Just a few minutes, please." He stopped a few feet from her, arms crossed, unreadable. "You don't belong here," he said. "No one does." She looked past him at the cold stove, the scattered tools, the quiet wreckage of what once was a place full of purpose. "Maybe neither do you," she whispered. Something flickered in his gaze. Surprise? Memory? But then it vanished. His voice was steel again. "Metal. Doors open. Walk through it." Sky nodded once. She turned, stepped back out into the storm. Behind her, the warehouse swallowed the silence once more. But the man didn't move. He stood there, staring at the door she'd just exited, as if the wind had carried something with her and left it behind. Rain hammered against the concrete like 1,000 nails. Sky's hoodie clung to her skin, heavy with water, her teeth chattering as she crouched behind a rusted barrel outside the warehouse. She didn't have the strength to keep walking, not tonight. Not with the wind biting through every layer, and her hands so numb she could barely flex them. She wrapped her arms around her knees and tried to disappear into the shadows. Inside, Nathan Cross stood in the dark, unmoving. He hadn't spoken to another soul in over 4 months, hadn't let one past the broken steel door since the day he sealed the shop for good. The warehouse had become more than a place. It was a vault, a grave, a boundary between what he was and what he refused to become again. But the girl, her eyes haunted him. Not desperate, not angry, just tired. The kind of tired that lives in the bones. He paced, twice, 3 times, then he cursed under his breath and yanked the door open. Hey! His voice was rougher than he meant it to be, but it carried over the rain. "Thy!" Sky flinched. She looked up, blinking through the downpour. Nathan stood in the doorway, backlit by the faint orange flicker of a single overhead bulb. He looked down at her for a long second, jaw tight. "Get in before you drown out here." She hesitated. Her legs ached, her shoes squelched with every step, but she rose slowly and followed him inside. Not out of trust, but out of surrender. She stepped over the threshold, dripping water onto the oil-stained floor. Nathan didn't look at her, He walked straight to the wood stove and lit a match with calloused fingers. The kindling caught slowly, reluctant to burn. "Sit," he muttered, pointing to a dented stool near the fire. "Don't touch anything." Skye nodded and sat, her arms hugging herself tightly. He disappeared for a moment, returned with an old, tattered blanket that smelled like dust and gasoline. She wrapped it around her shoulders anyway. No one spoke. The fire cracked softly. The rain outside roared. Then, quietly, "Thank you," she said, not looking at him. Nathan didn't respond. But for the first time in years, the warehouse didn't feel quite so hollow. The fire in the stove crackled softly, casting shadows that danced across the walls like forgotten memories. Skye sat on the stool, hunched forward, her fingers extended cautiously toward the warmth. Her soaked clothes steamed faintly, the blanket around her shoulders heavy but comforting. Her sneakers, set near the stove to dry, dripped quietly into a shallow pan Nathan had placed without a word. She didn't dare speak again. Nathan moved in the background like a ghost, silent, efficient, deliberate. He fetched an old tin mug from a shelf and filled it with lukewarm tap water, placing it on the workbench beside her. Then he returned to the far end of the warehouse, as though physical distance could protect him from whatever she might carry: desperation, intrusion, or worse, conversation. Skye took the mug with both hands, grateful for something to hold. Something solid. Something warmish. Bow. The warehouse creaked under the wind, its old steel joints groaning like bones. Overhead, the rain drummed steadily, but inside, there was only the fire, the girl, the man, and the smell of rust and engine grease. She looked around. Tools lay scattered across benches, some covered in dust, others half-assembled into machines she didn't recognize. Schematics were pinned to corkboards, their corners curled. On a shelf above the stove stood a row of old radios, broken clocks, and mechanical parts, none of them ticking, none of them singing. Everything here had once moved. Now it all sat silent, like it had been waiting for time to begin again. Skye's voice was tentative, a whisper between breaths. "You used to fix things." Nathan, across the room, didn't turn. His shoulders tensed for half a second. "Used to." She nodded, more to herself than to him. "This place, it feels like someone stopped the world halfway through a sentence." Nathan slowly turned his head. His eyes, steel blue, wary, met hers for only a moment. "That's because it was." He turned back, began wiping down a wrench that didn't need cleaning. Skye didn't press. She just sipped the water slowly and let the fire do its work. Her hands tingled as warmth returned to her fingers, but inside her chest was something else entirely. Something she hadn't felt in weeks. Stillness. Not fear, not chaos. Just stillness. For the first time in a long time, she thought, "I might survive tonight." And for Nathan, watching from the shadows of his shop, something even more foreign crept in. "Maybe, so will I." The morning came with no ceremony. Just pale light filtering through the high warehouse windows, dull and gray, smudged by years of dust. The fire had gone out hours ago, but the warmth it left lingered faintly, like an old song still echoing in the air. Skye stirred on the worn couch Nathan had wordlessly cleared for her the night before. She sat up slowly, the blanket still draped around her like armor. Her muscles ached from the cold, from sleeping half curled like a stray, but she was still here, still breathing. Nathan was nowhere in sight. She didn't know the rules of this place, but something told her silence was one of them. Her eyes drifted to the far side of the room where a tarp-covered shape leaned against the wall, tall, hulking, draped in shadows. Curiosity tugged at her. She stood, cautious, and stepped barefoot across the cold, concrete floor. She lifted the tarp carefully. Teizul. It was a machine. Old, complex, made of brass and iron and time. Skye couldn't tell if it was a clock or something else, but its design was beautiful, elegant even in its decay. Gears sat frozen mid-rotation. One arm dangled uselessly from a rusted joint. A large glass face at the center, fractured but intact, bore the remnants of numbers once etched in gold. The machine was broken, but not ruined. She leaned closer and for a second imagined what it must have sounded like when it worked. The rhythm, the precision, the purpose. Then, "Don't touch that." Nathan's voice came from behind her, not angry, but heavy. Sky stepped back instinctively. "Sorry, I didn't mean—" "I know." He walked forward, slower than before, like the weight of this machine made his steps heavier. "But that thing, it stopped for a reason." She looked at him quietly. "Did you build it?" Nathan's jaw tightened. He didn't answer right away. He just stared at the machine like it was a wound that never closed. "It was supposed to power something bigger," he said finally. "A kinetic grid, recycling motion, feeding itself endlessly. Everyone said it was impossible. I said I'd prove them wrong." He reached out and touched one of the gears, the movement so gentle it was almost reverent. It worked for 15 seconds. Sky waited, unsure, then it caught fire. The silence afterward wasn't empty. It was loaded, with guilt, memory, and smoke. Sky looked at the machine again. "Can it be fixed?" Nathan exhaled a sound between a laugh and a sigh. "That's not the question." "Then what is?" He looked at her, really looked this time. "Should it be?" Sky didn't reply. She didn't have the answer. But somewhere deep inside her, something said yes. Nathan didn't say much the rest of the morning. He returned to his corner of the warehouse, tinkering with a half-dismantled carburetor, tools clicking softly against metal. Sky kept her distance, folding the blanket neatly, wiping condensation from the windows with the sleeve of her shirt. She didn't expect gratitude. She wasn't even sure she deserved to be here. She just didn't want to be invisible anymore. By midday, the rain had returned, drumming heavier than before. The air turned colder, sharper, and the draft pushing under the warped garage door bit at Sky's ankles. She found a broom in the corner and swept without asking. Dust, bolts, a fallen washer or two. Her hands moved automatically, like they remembered the rhythm of staying useful. Nathan glanced up once, said nothing. That should have been enough. But when Sky drifted back to the machine, the one with the shattered face and sleeping gears, she found herself staring again. Her fingers itched to touch the brass casing, to see if the interior had corroded. If it hadn't, maybe she could. "Don't!" Nathan snapped from across the room. She jumped, turning fast. He was already walking toward her, his face hard, unreadable. "I told you, don't touch that." I didn't actually." Sky backed up a step, voice trembling. "Intent doesn't matter. In this place, there are rules." His words dropped like iron. Sky stood still, the broom handle clenched in her hand. Her chest tightened. "You said it was broken," she whispered. "Sometimes, broken things need help." Nathan's eyes flared. "And sometimes they stay broken for a reason." The silence that followed was sharp. She stared at him, hurt rising like a tide. "I should go," she muttered, dropping the broom with a soft clatter. She grabbed her shoes, still damp but wearable, and walked briskly to the door. Nathan didn't stop her. Not with words. Not with anything. The storm greeted her like a punishment, cold needles of rain slicing into her skin. She stepped outside, her breath catching as thunder rolled overhead. The warehouse door creaked shut behind her, not slammed, just closed. She walked toward the gravel lot, arms crossed tight, the wind howling in her ears. What did she expect? That someone like him would suddenly care? That she could just step into another life and fit? Sky sank down onto a low concrete step beside a rusted generator and curled into herself, legs pulled close, the rain pooling in her lap. She didn't cry. Not yet. But the ache behind her eyes built like pressure under glass. Inside, Nathan stood still. The machine sat in the same silence it had for years. But something inside him shifted, small, like a spring releasing tension. He had shouted at someone who only meant to help. Again, he ran a hand through his hair, exhaled sharply, then reached for the coat hanging by the door. The rain hit her like a curtain. Cold, unrelenting. Sky sat hunched beside the generator, trying to disappear into her own arms. The thin fabric of her shirt clung to her skin, soaked straight through, and her damp sneakers squished each time she shifted her weight. The cold wasn't just physical, it crept into her thoughts, her memories, the places where she had once believed people might care. The warehouse door creaked open behind her. She didn't turn. She didn't expect anything anymore. But then a shadow moved beside her. A coat, heavy and warm, was wordlessly draped across her shoulders. Nathan. He didn't speak, he didn't kneel. He just stood there, in the rain with her, his boots planted beside the puddle, forming at her feet. Skye looked up slowly, water dripping from her lashes. Her voice barely made it past her lips. "Why?" Nathan's eyes were distant, his jaw tight. "Because I've stood in the rain before too long myself." He turned back toward the warehouse, leaving the door slightly ajar behind him. She followed a few minutes later, her steps hesitant, her heart unsure. Inside, the space hadn't changed, but something in the air had. It wasn't warmer exactly, but it wasn't quite so cold either. The fire had been rekindled. A kettle steamed quietly on the old stovetop. Skye peeled off her wet shoes and sat on the rug in front of the flame, tucking the coat tighter around her like a shield. Nathan handed her a chipped mug of tea. "It's strong," he muttered. "Didn't have sugar." "It's fine," she said. "It's more than I expected." Their fingers brushed as she took the cup. Neither of them pulled away. He sat across from her, just out of reach. Just close enough. They sipped in silence. "That machine," Skye said after a moment, staring into the fire. "The one you built. The one you won't fix." Nathan looked at her, his gaze calm but guarded. "It took something from me," he said simply. "And I let it." Skye nodded. "Sometimes I think I've lost pieces too. But maybe we still have the blueprints." That made Nathan blink. Not in pain, in thought. The fire crackled again. Outside, the storm softened. Inside, something else began. Not forgiveness, not trust, but maybe the first cup of tea shared in a world neither of them had given up on yet. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the world glazed with silver light and puddles that shimmered like glass. Sunlight filtered through the high warehouse windows, casting long beams across the floor. The air smelled of steel, damp wood, and the faintest trace of tea. Skye was already awake. Hell. She sat cross-legged on the rug, staring at the machine, the broken one, the one Nathan wouldn't go near. Hell. The machine seemed to stare back. Nathan stood across the room, arms crossed, watching her watch it. The kettle hissed behind him, the fire quietly alive in the stove. Skye turned to face him, her voice soft but certain. "Let me fix it." Nathan blinked. "No. You haven't even—" I said no. He stepped forward, the edge returning to his voice, but not quite the same edge as before. Skye didn't flinch. She stood up slowly, her bare feet silent against the concrete. "I know what it is to be broken," she said. "I know what it means when something important stops moving. But if something can be repaired, shouldn't we try?" Nathan looked at her long and hard, his mouth set, his jaw tight. "You think you understand what that machine means to me?" "No," she admitted. "But I understand what it means to want something to work again. To need it." A silence stretched between them. Then, almost reluctantly, Nathan reached into the drawer beneath his workbench and pulled out a small brass key, worn, smoothed by time and memory. "If you break it," he said, walking over and placing the key into her palm, "you own it." "Deal," Skye said, her voice steady. They approached the machine together. The brass face was dull, its gears stiff, its panels locked by rust and memory. Skye placed the key into the side slot and turned. A click echoed through the room like a breath finally exhaled. Nathan pulled open a cabinet and laid out tools, precision screwdrivers, oilcloths, a loop, tiny brushes. He watched her as she rolled up her sleeves and knelt beside the heart of the machine. "You really think you can do this?" he asked. Skye looked up at him, her eyes full of something fragile but unshakable. "Not alone." Nathan hesitated, then knelt beside her. "Then let's begin." And just like that, the machine wasn't the only thing they started to take apart. They worked in silence at first, not the heavy kind, but the kind born from concentration. Pure, clean, focused. The kind that belongs in libraries, in sacred places, or at the heart of something broken being carefully put back together. Sky sat with the machine's panel open before her, the exposed gears inside coated in layers of grime and old regret. Nathan passed her tools without being asked. A fine-tipped brush, a cloth, a small vial of oil. She noticed how steady his hands were. He noticed how sure hers became. She cleaned the gears in slow, deliberate circles. Some were fused by rust. Others simply stuck from disuse. All of them seemed to be holding their breath. "You have good hands," Nathan said quietly. Sky looked up, surprised. "I used to fix things at the group home," she replied. "Toys, broken fans, cracked radios. I couldn't fix my life, but fixing something gave me a reason to stay upright." Nathan didn't answer. Instead, he leaned forward and adjusted a tension spring she had missed. "You see the details most people ignore?" he murmured. "That's rare." The compliment didn't sound like flattery. It sounded like fact. Time blurred. Hours slipped by, but neither noticed. The air smelled of oil and old brass. Shafts of sun crawled across the concrete floor and over the machine's face, which seemed somehow more alive, with each screw turned, each gear cleaned. Nathan guided her through the trickiest parts. How to realign the central regulator. How to rethread a slipped band without damaging the teeth. His voice, once clipped and cold, had softened into something else. "Careful," he said at one point. "That part's fragile." "So am I," Sky replied with a smirk. He almost smiled. Almost. Then came the moment. The core gear had been reset, the pendulum rebalanced. Sky held her breath. "Do it," Nathan said. Sky reached forward and gently pushed the start lever. Silence. Then, tick. Another tick. The pendulum moved. The second hand turned once. Then again. Sky blinked, her mouth parting slightly. "It's working." Nathan stared like he'd seen something rise from the dead. 5 years, he whispered. "It hasn't moved in 5 years." Sky looked up at him. "Neither have you." Nathan met her gaze, and for the first time, he didn't look away. "How are you feeling about the story so far? I'd really love to know what you think. Did it touch your heart or maybe remind you of something from your own life? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And while you're at it, tell me, where in the world are you listening from? I'd love to see how far this story travels." The machine ticked like it remembered how. Wheatwas. Soft. Measured. Reluctant at first, then surer with every passing second. The pendulum swung in its brass chamber, casting a gentle rhythm across the concrete floor. It wasn't just the sound, it was the feeling. A room long frozen, now breathing again. Sky stepped back, oil-streaked fingers pressed to her lips, eyes wide with disbelief. Nathan didn't speak. He circled the machine like a man seeing a ghost. He reached out, hesitating, then let his fingertips brush a gleaming gear, one they had cleaned together just an hour ago. "It's alive," he murmured. "We did that," Sky said softly. Nathan looked at her. And this time, it wasn't through the lens of suspicion or wariness. It was something gentler, clearer. "You did more than fix it," he said. Voice rough, with something he hadn't let himself feel in years. "You gave it back its heart." Sky smiled. And it wasn't cautious. Not guarded. It was real. They stood in silence as the machine ticked steadily beside them, as though it had never stopped. Then Nathan turned away, walked to a battered storage cabinet near the back wall, and pulled out something small, a box, velvet, frayed at the corners. He held it for a moment, running his thumb along its edge, then walked back and extended it to her. "This was the first timepiece I ever made, hand-cut gears, custom case. I kept it, even when I sold everything else." Sky didn't take it at first. "Why are you giving it to me?" "Because you reminded me that even broken designs can be made to move again." She opened the box. Inside lay a silver pocket watch. Polished but simple, its second hand ticking in soft, steady circles. On the back, engraved in tiny cursive, "Begin again?" Her breath caught. "I don't deserve this," she said. "You stayed," Nathan replied. "That's more. than most ever did. Sky closed her hand around the watch, holding it like something sacred. They didn't hug. They didn't cry. But the look they shared was full of unspoken truths. Mo ever pen. Outside, the rain had stopped. Mo thine. Inside, the machine ticked on. Mo died. And in both their hearts, something else began to turn again, slowly, steadily, beautifully. That night, the warehouse felt different. The ticking of the restored machine echoed gently through the space, not loud, not imposing, just present, like a heartbeat returning to a long-forgotten chest. The shadows seemed softer, the corners less haunted, and for the first time in who knew how long, warmth didn't only come from the fire. Heskett. It came from two people, Nuffle. Sky stood at the tiny stove tucked behind a workbench, stirring a pot of soup made from mismatched cans and half a bruised onion. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't much. But it smelled like comfort. Nathan sat nearby, watching with folded arms and something almost like amusement on his face. "You sure you didn't miss your calling as a chef?" he asked. Sky looked over her shoulder, mock serious. "I'm a culinary genius when the pantry contains only beans and expired broth." He smirked, and this time the smile actually reached his eyes. When she brought over two mismatched bowls and handed one to him, they sat on the floor, legs crossed in front of the fire, the repaired machine ticking behind them. They ate in easy silence. "So," Sky said between spoonfuls, "what's next? Now that the machine works again?" Nathan leaned back, staring into the flames. "Don't know. Haven't thought that far ahead in 5 years. You could reopen the workshop." He chuckled. Dry, a little self-deprecating. "What would I even do with it?" Sky tilted her head. "Teach, fix things, build again. I'm sure there are people out there who'd love to learn from you." Nathan went quiet for a moment. "Maybe. And maybe," she added gently, "it doesn't have to be just your burden anymore." He glanced at her then, eyes soft but unsure. "You think you're staying?" Sky stared into her bowl, swirling the last bits of soup. "I don't know. I never planned that far ahead either. But," she looked up, "this place feels like the first place in a long time where I don't want to leave." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was full of something new, something hopeful. Nathan stood and rummaged through a drawer before returning with a bottle of dusty wine and 2 cracked mugs. "I was saving this for a moment I never thought would come. And now?" He poured clumsily, handed her a mug. "Now seems close enough." They drank. They didn't toast. They didn't need to. Later, as the fire settled into glowing embers and the machine ticked on like a lullaby, Nathan leaned back against the wall, eyes closed. Sky lay nearby, curled under a quilt that hadn't seen use in years. She watched the shadows dance across the rafters and whispered, "Looks like time isn't the only thing that started moving again." Nathan didn't respond, but the smile on his face said enough. The days began to blend into a rhythm. Shupmatspear Avon. It wasn't busy, it wasn't loud, but it was alive. Shupmatspear Avon. Morning started with Sky sweeping the floor or boiling water, while Nathan tinkered quietly with forgotten tools. They worked in parallel, her movements light, always humming under her breath, his deliberate, exacting, softened by her presence. By the end of the week, Sky had found a flyer posted on a notice board outside the nearby train depot. Downtown Public Library, volunteers needed for literacy program. She'd stared at it for a long time before taking it down and folding it into her coat pocket. That night, over soup and bread, she mentioned it. "There's this position. Only part-time. Helping kids read, sorting donations. It's nothing fancy." Nathan didn't say anything right away, just chewed thoughtfully, then nodded. "Sounds like a good fit." "You think?" He looked at her then, not with approval or permission but recognition. "You've been putting things back together your whole life. Maybe now it's time to help others start from page 1. Sky blinked. That was more than encouragement. That was belief. The next morning, she walked 2 miles to the library and filled out the form. When the call came 2 days later, Her hands trembled as she answered it. "You've been accepted," the woman said. "Your application was honest. Raw, we could use that." Sky hung up and stood in the center of the warehouse, phone still in hand. Nathan looked up from his workbench. "Well?" She smiled. "Just a little." "I got it!" He nodded once, then went back to sanding a small gear. "Try not to be late on your first day." That afternoon, she packed her backpack with a notebook, a pen, and the silver pocket watch he gave her. She paused at the door. "I'll be back before dinner." "I'll pretend to be surprised," Nathan said without looking up. Sky laughed and stepped out into the early sunlight. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a burden. Or a guest. She felt like she belonged. And back inside the warehouse, Nathan sat still for a long time after she left, staring at the empty mug she'd left behind. Then he stood and walked slowly into the back room, the one he hadn't opened since the accident. Dust coated everything, but the bones of the place were still strong. He ran his hand along the old workbench. "Maybe it's time," he whispered. Then, with sleeves rolled up and the faint sound of ticking behind him, Nathan began to clean. The sign was nothing more than a scrap of wood Nathan had carved years ago, back when he believed in first drafts and futures. He sanded the dust from it, brushed the letters back into view. Bellamy Mechanical, precision, patience, purpose. Then, beneath it, he added a new line in fresh paint. Uneven but sincere. Basic repairs. Skills training. Second chances. He nailed it to the front door of the warehouse the same morning Sky left for her third day at the library. He said nothing about it when she asked what he'd be doing that day. Just shrugged. Tinkering. But when she came home that evening, the sign was there, gently swaying in the breeze like a flag planted on new ground. Her heart caught in her throat. "You really did it," she said, almost afraid to believe it. Nathan stood by the doorway, cleaning grease from his hands. "Don't know how many people will show up." "You showed up," she said simply. "That's enough to start." And someone did show up. A few days later, a teenage boy stood outside the warehouse, clutching a cracked wristwatch with shaking fingers. Tattoos lined his arms. His hoodie was 2 sizes too big, and he looked like he was ready to bolt at the first wrong word. Nathan opened the door himself. "You fix things?" the boy asked. Nathan eyed the watch. Then the boy, "Sometimes." He stepped aside. "Come in." Word spread slowly, then steadily. The warehouse began to fill. Not with noise, but with presence. Young people. Lost people. People who had broken more than clocks, but still held onto the pieces. Nathan taught without realizing he was teaching. He didn't lecture. He guided, gave tools, watched closely. In return, they gave him silence he didn't dread. In veal. Abla. Sky would return from the library and find the old workshop full of soft conversation, ticking watches, and the scrape of screwdrivers on brass. Her favorite part was hearing Nathan's voice in the middle of it, not shouting, not retreating, but coaching. Once, she caught him laughing, actually laughing. The sound was rough, unfamiliar, and absolutely beautiful. Later that evening, as they sat on the warehouse steps eating dinner from takeout containers, she nudged his arm gently. "What made you open the door again?" Nathan stared at the night sky for a long moment, then answered without looking at her. "Because the world's full of broken things." He turned his gaze to her. Softer now. "But maybe it just needs more people willing to fix them." Sky rested her head on his shoulder, warm in the chill air, and whispered, "And more people willing to stay." The warehouse breathed again. Where once the only sound was the restless wind and the memory of ticking, now there were voices, quiet, careful, sometimes laughing. Gears clicked, screwdrivers turned, and every surface bore signs of something in progress. A watch opened for repair, a radio humming faint static, a sketch pinned to the wall with grease-stained tape. Nathan moved differently now. Yuzu. He still kept his sleeves rolled up, and his voice measured, but something in him had relaxed. He no longer walked, as if waiting for a shadow to fall. He stood taller, not because the weight was gone, but because he no longer carried it alone. Sky, too, had found her rhythm. Her mornings were spent at the library, organizing children's books, mentoring shy teens who wouldn't look adults in the eye, and listening to stories no one else had time to hear. She came home with ink on her fingers and hope in her pockets. In the evenings, she worked beside Nathan, helping disassemble pocket watches or polish old tools until her hands ached in the best possible way. One night, as they reorganized a tray of springs and cogs, Nathan pulled out an old photo from beneath a drawer. It was a younger version of him, standing beside a woman at a workshop table. Her hair was swept back in a bun, her eyes laughing. She held a violin in one hand, a screwdriver in the other. "Elise," he said, voice low. "She was music, I was gears, and we never got to finish our duet." Sky didn't speak. She just reached for his hand, quietly, gently. "You're not erasing her by building something new," she said. "You're honoring her by not letting time stop." Nathan let the silence settle, then gave a slow nod. "I used to think healing meant forgetting, but maybe it just means adding chapters." They built a new workbench together the next day. It wasn't perfect. One leg was slightly uneven. The top had a dent from when a wrench slipped, but it was theirs. And every student who walked through the door left a fingerprint on it through questions asked, skills learned, and stories shared. Sometimes Nathan still sat alone in the evenings, letting the workshop go quiet again, but it was no longer the silence of loss. It was reflection and gratitude. Sky would join him on the stairs with 2 cups of tea, one always stronger than the other, and together they would watch the light fade behind the rooftops. No words needed. They had already spoken the most important ones. The warehouse no longer felt like a relic. Its walls, once stale with time and regret, now echoed with movement, quiet conversation, and the rhythmic ticking of clocks that had long been silent. Light streamed through clean windows. The floors were swept. Every tool had a place. And every person who walked through the front door left just a little bit more whole than they'd entered. A full year had passed since Sky stumbled inside, rain-soaked and unsure. Nathan still remembered the look on her face, the blend of fear, exhaustion, and hope she hadn't yet allowed herself to feel. He remembered the moment she reached for a machine no one else had dared to touch, and the first time he heard her laugh while oiling gears. Now, as he walked through the workshop, he saw her influence in every corner. She'd organized the storage cabinets, labeled the tool racks, even added a bulletin board where students could pin their own drawings, projects, or thank you notes. One of them read, "You helped me fix more than a clock. You helped me believe I could do something right." Nathan paused in front of it every morning before unlocking the door. Sky, too, had grown. She was now a full-time program lead at the library, running community outreach for teens and women rebuilding their lives. The same fire that had kept her moving through hardship now warmed everyone around her. She carried it lightly, never for show, but always in service of those still finding their way. One cool autumn evening, the workshop hosted a celebration. Former students returned, some with repaired watches in their pockets, others just to say thank you. The warehouse buzzed with voices and music. Someone played the old radio in the back, static and all. Sky stood on the upper walkway, watching the crowd below. Nathan joined her, handing her a mug of cider. "Still think I should have stayed the hermit?" he asked with a quiet smirk. Sky sipped, smiled. "Only on the days you burn the toast." They both laughed, softly, naturally, like a language they now spoke without trying. At midnight, after the last goodbye had been said and the space returned to stillness, Nathan took Sky by the hand and led her to the center of the room. The machine, that machine, stood tall, humming steadily with each swing of its pendulum. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the brass key, the one that had once sealed his grief. With a quiet click, he opened the glass casing and adjusted a single dial. The machine responded with a low chime, 12 clear notes ringing out into the quiet, measured in full. Sky placed her palm on the frame, the metal now warm beneath her touch. "So many years," she whispered. "So many days that felt like ends, when they were just beginnings." Nathan looked at her, his voice barely above a breath. "Do you remember what you said to me that day?" She nodded. "If you don't want time to stop forever, let me try." He squeezed her hand. "You did more than try. You gave it back to me." They stood together as the last chime faded into silence. Not a silence of emptiness, but of peace. Outside, the wind rustled the trees. Inside, two hearts stood side by side, no longer bound by what they had lost, but lifted by what they had built. 1 year later. One step closer. The days were never perfect. Bam means. Some mornings still arrived heavy with memories. Some nights were still quiet in a way that tugged at old wounds. Nathan sometimes stared too long at the far wall of the workshop, where Elisa's violin once hung. Skye occasionally paused in the middle of reshelving library books, lost in a flash of who she used to be, when everything she owned fit inside a backpack. But healing, they'd learned, didn't mean erasing the past. It meant carrying it differently. The warehouse had become a sanctuary, not just for gears and clocks, but for people. For second chances, Nathan had students now. A waiting list, even. They came to learn how to fix watches, but they stayed to remember how to believe in something again. His voice, once so guarded, now filled the space with instructions, encouragement, the occasional dry joke, and sometimes, without even realizing it, hope. Skye, too, had changed more than just jobs. She no longer walked with her shoulders curled in. She stood tall, bright-eyed, always carrying two things in her bag: a dog-eared notebook full of plans and the silver pocket watch Nathan had given her. The back still read, "Begin again." One late winter morning, snow dusted the city in silence. Skye stood in the kitchen corner of the warehouse, humming softly while pouring tea. Nathan joined her, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "You're up early," he murmured. "Can't sleep," she smiled. "Too many ideas." "Dangerous." "Hopeful," she corrected. He leaned on the counter beside her, sipping quietly. "You think this is it?" he asked. "The final version of us?" Skye thought for a long moment, then shook her head. "No. I think we're still in the middle. I think we're always in the middle. And that's kind of the point." Nathan looked at her then, and in that glance was everything unspoken. The grief they survived, the laughter they rebuilt, the machine they restarted together, and the future neither of them planned, but somehow found anyway. Later that day, a new student arrived. A girl, barely 17, clutching a small, shattered music box. "Someone said you teach people how to fix things," she said shyly. Nathan held the door open. "We do," he replied with a glance toward Skye. "Come in." That evening, as they closed up the shop, Nathan stood in the doorway and looked out at the snow-covered world beyond. Skye came up beside him. "You ever think," she asked, "about how none of this was supposed to happen? How I just walked in by accident?" He looked at her, warmth rising behind tired eyes. "Sometimes the door we walk through by mistake," he said slowly, "leads us exactly where we're meant to be." The machine ticked behind them. The wind moved outside. And together, step by step, they walked forward. Not perfect, not finished, but finally, and completely, alive. If this story moved you, reminded you that healing is real, or renewed your belief in second chances, we invite you to subscribe to Healing Stories. Here, we share real-life journeys of strength, love, and hope. Stories that speak straight to the soul. Thank you for being here. And always remember, no matter how far you fall, there's always a way back to the light. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below and let us know.